This is our exercise review for the microservices section, and here we are going to create a blog microservice. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm in the main JHipster conference folder, and I'm going to create a new directory, and we'll call it blog. I'm going to cd into blog and run JHipster. And remember, this type of generator is going to be a microservice application. We're going to call this blog. So this was one of my tips in the exercise notes. So we got to make sure that we are avoiding port conflicts here. And if you remember, our conference app is going to run on port 8080. So let's run this on 8082. We're going to give it a default package name. We do want to use the JHipster registry. We do want JWT authentication. Now in this case, what type of database would you like to use? We're going to use MongoDB because that was one of our requirements. Maven, and we're going to not choose any of those. No internationalization. We'll go ahead and choose some testing support and no other generators. So we're going to go ahead and generate this application out. Now the real nice thing is, what I want you to do is, we're not going to actually jump in this and look at it ourselves, but I want you to look at the code that it produces when we create the conference app, and we created those entities based on knowing that we were writing to an H2 database, right? So it knew that we were writing out to those H2 databases and wrote like an JPA entity on the domain model. And then it looked at what it ends up generating for the domain model when we're using a MongoDB data store. So it's really nice to see that it just figures all of that out and writes this out all for us. Like, we don't need to understand that base layer. Again, we're focusing on business logic, not kind of the groundwork that we need to lay for our application. So that is done now. So let's go ahead and clear that. Now, before we start this up, we need a data model, right? That was one of our requirements. So we're going to jump into JDL Studio. And again, I'm going to keep this real simple. My kind of notes for you were that you can keep this as simple or as complex as you'd like. If you want to create a blog, a author, post, like whatever you want to do, and maybe even do that. If you wanted to try and create this a little bit more complex, that's good practice. But I want to keep this real simple here. So the first thing I want to note that is, you'll see that I'm writing in an ID here. On the JPA side, we didn't need to do that. We didn't add an ID in JDL Studio, and that's because it's created for us. Here, we do need to add that ID because we're using MongoDB. So I'm going to use a title. We'll call this string. That's also required. I got an author string required. I have a post, which is a text blob, and that is also required. And one last thing, so remember, we needed to say this is a microservice with blog. So this data model belongs to the microservice blog. So now what I need to do is actually download this. Okay, so now that I've downloaded my blog.jh file, so I'm going to go into, I know you can't see this, let me just jump into this directory real quick. Let me pull this over. So I've copied what I downloaded here, and I'm going to go into our blog, source, main, resources, and I'm just going to create a new folder here called JDL. So this one doesn't have it. So I'm going to paste that into there. But I'm also going to come back to my gateway, and I'm going to go into that source, main, resources, and we already have a JDL there from before, and I'm going to paste that in. So now with those two in place, now what we should be able to do is go ahead and import those. So let me make sure I'm still where I think I am. I am. So I'm in the blog. So here I'm going to go JHipster import JDL, and I'm going to go to source, main, resources, JDL, blog, and that should run. So that looks like it's okay, and an entity generation completed. Again, it's just generating the server-side code here, so we're doing a domain model, and if we look at that, so source main java.com, jhipcon, domain blog.java, you could see that it's actually using the Mongo at document annotation here and using the collection of blog. So it knows based on the database that we're using how to kind of generate that entity for us. So that is working on the blog side. Now what we need to do is go back to our gateway and we need to generate some front end stuff. So remember we copied it there, so we'll do the same thing. jhipster import JDL, go source main resources JDL and our blog. And so the entity blog is updated. Here's all of our kind of front end components. Do we want to override stuff? I'm going to say yes to all. So we're overriding that stuff. And that should be it from the domain model. So now what we're going to do is once this is done, we're going to start up our blog application and our gateway application again since we stopped it here. And then we should be able to go ahead and hit the UI and enter in some blog. And mostly what I want to show you is that we're going to be using MongoDB. So when we save that, I want you to see it saved into the MongoDB database. So let's go ahead and start our gateway here. And before we actually run our blog application, I need to go ahead and run MongoD. And so if that's up, I should be able to go ahead and run our blog application now. A couple of things. If you run into any problems with the import of the JDL, usually it has to do with maybe not having the right file extension, not having the right syntax in there. I've run into a couple of those over time, so just pay attention to the syntax and make sure you have the right file name and the right extension on there, and it should be okay. Next, make sure in this case that you're using MongoDB, make sure MongoDB is started before you go running the blog application. If not, you're going to see a bunch of errors trying to access that. So I'm going to pull up, I have this application here. This is going to let me look at my MongoDB documents. All right, so now our blog application is running at 8082. And if I come over here, and let me just refresh this, we have our blog database in MongoDB, which is nice. And we have a blog collection. So let's go ahead and hit the UI. So we're going to go back to 8080 because our gateway application, again, we started that right back up. So now what we should do is log in. All right, we're already logged in as admin. And now we have blog. So now we can create a new blog. And I've already actually run this once before using that same database on the Mongo side. So we have a blog there, but let's go ahead and create another one. We'll call this my first post. The author is me. And this is awesome. So now let's go ahead and save that. And again, I'll bring back Robo3T over here. And if we look at our blog collection, we have now two objects in here. And here's the object for the post that we just created. So that's pretty cool. We have two independent microservices. We still have our speaker and our session over here. And again, we were using H2 for this before. So if we go over here to database and we logged into here, you would see our speakers and our sessions. So this is pretty cool. This wasn't, again, too difficult. If you wanted to get into some of the bonus stuff, again, I would make like a nice homepage for our conference. You wouldn't see this stuff if you were logged in or not logged in and just a regular user. And then you can start to play with it and list out speakers and sessions and our agenda and maybe even our blog here. So I hope you enjoyed working on this exercise. I hope you learned a few things in this section. And I hope you're excited about microservices. They really are great now that we know what they are and kind of when to use them. So with that, I think we'll end this section and let's go ahead and move on.